You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. The Sox Nerd is on this episode of Sox in the Basement. James Fox from FutureSox also joining us to talk prospects, focus for the team. Are they really going to move Garrett, Crochet, and Luis Robert Jr.? Man, I hope not. James is also going to be a part of our big launch. We're bringing long-form interviews right here from the 9-foot homemade oak bar. Video interviews from Sox in the Basement to our YouTube channel. That kicks off on Monday on the Sox in the Basement YouTube channel. So subscribe because you're going to hear some of me and James sitting down here, but you're going to get a really cool, in-depth, behind-the-scenes, here's a rumor you might not have heard of, discussion on Sox in the Basement YouTube coming up on Monday. That and this program brought to you proudly by Cork and Carry at the Park in the shadow of the ballpark at 33rd and Princeton with the award-winning menu of burgers and ballpark favorites. The big, beautiful bar with craft beer, familiar favorites, spirits, and wines. Pre-game, bring the whole family, get them fed. Post-game, it's a party, win or lose. Your home base for White Sox viewing. The official sponsors of Sox in the Basement. And they're going to be a blast this weekend. I'm going to get out there. I think I'm going to be out there the day this episode drops. Look for me pregame. I watched the last couple days with the Sox and the Cubs, and I watched it from a perspective of, nice to see some guys getting hits. Nice to see Andrew Vaughn 4 for 8 and on base 5 out of 9 times, right? Like nice to see Corey Lee driving in runs in spite of his manager still mismanaging how often he uses him at catcher. Like, I was shocked when the All-Star ballot came out, Ed, because the White Sox are putting up Corey Lee to be the catcher selection from their team on the ballot. And I'm shocked because Maldonado's played the exact same amount of games. And White Sox fans are pretty shocked as well, because if you're paying attention to social media, and we promoted it too, I don't know who started it, but it's beautiful. White Sox fans, by the thousands, are writing in Martin Maldonado right now on their all-star ballots. A guy with a 0.76 average at this point. As just maybe the coolest protest against Pedro and everything going on with this team.
Yeah, and that's, we've got to sell Jerry banners. We've got, all the things that are said about Pedro, but putting Martin Maldonado in the All-Star game would be just, chef's kiss on sarcastic responses to how your team is performing.
Right? I mean, I love it. I didn't come up with it. I see it happening, and I'm like,
I'm all for it.
Vote Maldi. Do something that would embarrass the team, even if he doesn't make it, because he won't. A write-in ballot from Chicago is not getting on the All-Star ballot. If he was hitting 400 and we were writing him in, he wouldn't get in, because there are bigger markets with bigger machines to get him on the All-Star team. But I want him to have the most votes of any White Sox player. I want to see when they put it out there that he has more votes than anybody else that was available for the White Sox to get on there.
What if he's the lone White Sox representative?
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing.
But when I look at that Cubs-Sox series, I also think to myself, these teams both suck. The Sox lost, but they also lost to a terrible team. So while I enjoyed all the runs that were being scored, I also understand they're playing a really bad team. They're hyped up. It was fun. They lost both games. So what? In the grand scheme of things, them winning those games or losing those games shouldn't influence whether or not you're keeping Pedro around, right? Ken Rosenthal sitting around saying on Foul Territory after he wrote the article for The Athletic about Pedro Grifol's time running out. He basically mapped out a timeline where, from what he's hearing, Pedro's gone. They're just waiting until some young guys come up from the minors after the All-Star break, and then they're going to want to change the environment. Then it's time to make a change, which smacks of Jerry Reinsdorf basically saying to Chris Getz, you can't fire him till he's finished half his contract, because I'm just giving him money then for no reason. This goes back to the report that Jerry was unhappy and Pedro was getting fired. And then the other reports that came out that said Jerry didn't want to pay him to sit on his couch for 2 years. And the idea that they're keeping this joker around as a placeholder when they know eventually they're going to move on from him, probably to an interim manager, and then have some sort of a search in the offseason. But they already know they're going to get rid of him, but they're keeping him around right now because wins and losses don't matter, and Jerry doesn't want to pay anybody anything to be the manager, which is weird to me because you don't need to hire anybody else. Do you really have to increase the payroll of like Montoya if you move him from bench coach to manager? Or does he just stay on and you just put a thing in front? Like, I don't know. Is it written in their contract that Jerry has to pay an extra $50,000 if he gets rid of him now instead of gets rid of him in August? It's confusing to me.
No, I mean, especially when, yeah, you can promote a minor league coach and pay somebody. I guess that would be the thing. Is do they have enough coaches to fill it? And because they have
Grady
Sizemore doesn't have a position,
right?
Yeah, so you could let Pedro go and just go with this coaching staff for the most part and give somebody the interim tag. And Montoya makes a lot of sense. He's a former manager.
Not a good one. But like, he was a former manager. Like, he knows how to fill out a lineup card, right?
Well, and that's what I mean. Like, you're sitting here saying it's going to be an interim tag. I think the question becomes, are you going to make a big move? Are you going to make a big swing?
It'll be Tony. He's going to bring Tony back.
Oh, for God's sake.
He'll bring Tony back. Ozzy's head will explode on the postgame when he hears it. He'll be like, they'll bring Tony back again. He'll come walking in there. He looks like the Crypt Keeper now, if you've seen him. If you've seen Tony La Russa recently, he's aged badly since last we saw him, right? Okay, I mean, time caught up and hit him with the time stick. And he comes waddling back in, to finish off the last couple of months. I mean, look, if we're going to be absurd, let's get really absurd.
Yeah, I think you'll actually see Ozzie again rip his goatee off and slam it down to the floor.
Right. They won't give him another chance. And he's the one everybody wants. You know how many times people come up to me and they know I do this podcast and they say hi, and the first thing everybody says is, man, they really should bring Ozzie back. At least it would be entertaining. People would watch more. I'm getting physical therapy done for a back injury. And I started with a guy who's a chiropractor on the South Side, who, by the way, has a Mike Massey jersey hanging in his place because he takes care of Massey in the offseason. I was like, oh, man, I'm cool. Major League Baseball players come in here and me. Like, I felt good about that. And guy's sitting there talking to me, and the first thing he says to me, he's like, I haven't watched any games. They're boring. What's the point of wasting my time? I just kind of forgot about him the last couple of months. If they brought Ozzie back, I'd watch. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. I mean, I have no idea what's going on. I couldn't name 5 guys that were on the roster that weren't on the roster last year. I haven't paid any attention to them. They obviously didn't care, so I just didn't watch this year. But if they brought Ozzie back, I'd probably pay attention.
Well, that makes sense. And not just, and here's the thing, it actually makes sense from a baseball perspective, not just from a Ozzie as a personality perspective, because if you think about Ozzie Ball, if you think about how he managed the games, right, there was, movement on the base paths, right? They would do some hit and runs. They would try and manufacture runs. They would play solid defense or guys would get sat, right? The pitching is not going to be what it was in his first era, but at the same time, at least it wouldn't be station to station. You wouldn't see him fill out a lineup card that requires Andrew Vaughn to hit a 3-run home run for them to score runs, when Andrew Vaughn, at this point, as he demonstrated in 2 games against the Cubs, might be better off just trying to get his butt on base, and just trying to get something done as opposed to trying to be Paulie 2.0. I don't know. The idea of Ozzie managing the team, yeah, it does become more interesting, not just because of the post-game remarks, which would be amazing, but because, he actually would probably try and scratch something out of this very light-hitting, weak-hitting team. It's a little why are the Cubs 31-31? Why are they 500 and the White Sox are so far under when the Cubs are arguably just as hard to watch in some ways? Well, it's because Craig Counsell knows how to manage a baseball team, and he knows how to try and get something out of what he's got.
Sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar, I have James Fox from FutureSox as we kick off a new thing on Sox in the Basement, which is going to be more video, expanded interviews on our YouTube channel. A lot of this is because FutureSox has far more subscribers than I do on YouTube, and I have to catch up. How are you, James?
I'm good, sir. It's because prospect content. People love the future.
That's all we have.
Yeah, and not only did I drive up here today, I look like Hulk Hogan. So,
I love it.
It is what it is.
I love it. I should have warned you because, that camera has a yellow and white sign, and you're wearing yellow.
Yeah,
so I would imagine the finished product, you're going to be a little yellow.
Yeah, well, my wife wasn't up to like dress me, so like when I got up, so.
All right, before we get into it, those listening on the regular Sox in the Basement podcast feed, you're going to hear 10 minutes of a full 30-minute session with me and James talking White Sox, talking prospects, talking about the front office. We got a lot of topics we're going to get into. Things that he hears. Because I don't know if you've ever noticed, if James says it, you can tell it's pretty solid information. And he's got some information today. So listen to this next segment, enjoy it, and then on Monday, we're kicking off these new videos on YouTube. Just look for the Sox in the Basement YouTube channel and subscribe. We need subscribers. This portion of the show brought to you by Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, and storm doors with no high-pressure sales. Most window stores will show up in your house. They're going to walk in. They're going to have an example window. They're going to lay out a bunch of dingy things in your living room, on your kitchen table, and then they don't want to leave. They're basically telling you like, hey, take this offer because I don't know if that offer is going to be here in a couple of days. Nobody wants to shop that way. Nobody wants to host a bunch of strangers in their home, and then they're like, well, I don't have what you're looking for here, but here's a picture of it. That's not how it works at Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. You go to their showroom, you see everything right there, full size, owners in the showroom, owner on site, all their own workers. 40 years they've been doing it like this in Oak Forest since 1985 with all major brands custom made and no stock items for a perfect fit. They are a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. How do you feel when I sit there and I say that my mindset has changed since the so-called rebuild of years ago? I'm not interested as much in the prospects anymore because I just watched it now. I watched it with the Cubs where if things wouldn't have gone perfectly, they fall short in the World Series. It came really close to them never getting a championship. I watched the Astros, but now I know that even though there was all that team building and going down into the dumps, they also needed the boost of a little bit of cheating. That's obvious. I watched the White Sox try to tear down and come back again, and a lot of other teams around Major League Baseball try to do it. Look at the Pittsburgh Pirates right now. They did this huge teardown. They came back, and they're floundering right now, just like the White Sox did a couple of years ago for a lot of the same reasons. Manager might not be right. Prospects that were can't-miss prospects are hitting with below-average OPSs, and they can't score any runs. It seems really familiar. So to me, I look at this now and go, I don't know if you can make a team championship caliber necessarily by tearing down to the studs and bringing back prospects because like 1 out of every 5 prospects may actually be a positive impact on your team.
Yeah, I think you have to get so many of them. Like, look at Baltimore, right? Like, Baltimore has so many of them that they're going to have enough and then they can insulate further, right? So the White Sox plan before, I think, was sound. But then they did a lot of bad stuff. Now, obviously, like, the prospects didn't hit, right? Like, we're very excited about Yoan Moncada and Eloy Jimenez and all these guys that have ultimately turned into nothing, right?
I was excited.
Yeah. But, I mean, when your free agent moves are I love the Yasmani Grandal signing. It didn't work, right? Like, you signed a Dallas Keuchel. I think we talked before the show, like, the 2 focal points, like, for me, the 2 big, like, things that they blew. Not signing Bryce Harper, who would have come here if you would have ponied up the cash, and hiring Tony La Russa.
And the worst thing was he kept looking at Machado instead of Harper.
Yeah,
and
like
Harper was the better option that you could have signed for less money.
He would have come.
He would have come. He wanted to come. We've seen it in interviews since then, and they just dropped the ball on that.
Yeah, they weren't interested.
Yeah.
Right? So you make those 2 moves. I don't know that you win a title, right? You hire AJ Hinch or Alex Cora or whoever instead of Jerry, right? I don't know that you win a title, but you're not sitting at 15 and 47 in 2024. So there are a lot of
maybe win a playoff series or 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of mistakes along the way. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, I wouldn't get super excited. Like, but to me, like, I know, like, what the prospect game is, right? Like, I come from it from a standpoint of, like, yeah, a lot of these guys are going to fail. The pitchers, like, some of them are going to be in the bullpen. Some of them, like, are never going to even pitch it. Like, that's why you need so many of them, right? Like, when I say good things about these guys, that doesn't mean that I think they're all going to be, like, big league stars. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? But it also doesn't mean that, like, since the plan didn't work last time, that it can't work this time. And the position that they're in, like, what we want the owner to spend their way out of it. But they're not going to do that.
If you saw them go and do something crazy, which I've already said it publicly and I'll say it again, it'd be insane to me to give up a Luis Robert Jr. that's got 3.5 years of control if you count the rest of this year, and a Garrett Crochet that's got 2.5 years of control if you count this year, the rest of this year. To give them both up and really restart and suck for a couple of years feels insane to me, because your only hope is that the package you get back will have a Garrett Crochet in there, and we'll have a Luis Robert Jr. And you don't get that all the time in packages. So to me, like, I'm afraid if they do that, it's a signal that they don't think Montgomery's good, that they don't think all of these pitchers that they're talking about are actually capable of doing it, because you're signaling you are really far away, and that's why you're making that move.
Yeah, I mean, I think it signals like 26 at the earliest for sure, right? And if that's the case, then like you do only have 2 years of Luis Robert. So I think like, you know, the argument, like the risk assessment is, okay, like if we keep him, when can we realistically be good enough to like contend for playoff spots like with him on the team, right? And if that's 26 or 27, like you're only going to have him for 1 or 2 years, like does it actually accelerate you getting 4 or 5 players for him?
But I always say this, like you got to fill 9 guys on a lineup, right? And you've got to have a bench, and you've got to have 26 men on the roster, right? So it's really hard when you say, okay, this year's our contention window, and we're ready to open for business, right? We saw how hard it is to go get the premier free agent at $20 million a year. Even if he's 2 years at $40 million total in those last 2 years of his deal, you're going to have a hard time finding a guy his caliber if he's healthy, because I know that's the big thing. Well, you don't know if he's going to be healthy, but if he's healthy and if he is what we saw last season, and you're seeing that out there, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody you could sign for $20 million a year for 2 years, when you'll have gotten rid of him, and then you'll be out there in the market. You won't be able to find a him to bring to your team necessarily. That's what my concern is.
No, I mean, he's a top 5 player in the American League.
Yeah.
He's hurt a lot, right? So you could do the Byron Buxton thing, right? So yeah, you need players around him. I think the most likely scenario is Luis Robert is on the 2025 White Sox, like with your host of Colson Montgomerys and Brian Ramoses and like all these young guys, right? And then you kind of see and go from there. But that's not because of like an unwillingness by Chris Getz or this front office to trade Luis Robert. I think if they hear the names they want, I think they'll do it, because I think that's just the mode that they're in. I don't think anybody can do it, Chris. I don't. Like, you look at prospect packages across the league, like Seattle could pull it off because they have like a ton of position player prospects and they're all young, and like, but I just like, I don't know how many general managers are going to have the appetite to pull like a Juan Soto like trade for Luis Robert, like, even for 3.5 years of him, because it's just tough. It's hard to, you know, it's like a hard trade to make if you're the White Sox. And if you're Chris Getz, like you can't sell Luis Robert for like a good trade, right? They can't trade Luis Robert and then you have me on and I say, oh yeah, they did okay.
Yeah, like, you know, it's got to be
that can't happen.
Slam dunk, because that's the thing. Like, I look at the Cease deal that was made where Thorpe comes back, and Iriarte looks like he's pretty good, and that young outfielder that they have is at least doing something down in single A, but who knows if he turns into something. But the guy I look at is Thorpe, because I sit there and I go, okay, that's a guy who could be a Cease. And so to me, I go, he held out. And so to me, he had all this pressure. He had the national pressure to make moves. He had a lot of people sitting there saying he's holding out for too much. He's not going to be worth anything. You're going to, you know, he's going to end up being stuck with them. I saw that, which I thought was crazy. But he seems to at least have the stones to hang in there for the right deal. Do you feel that way watching him?
Yeah, that's why I think if they trade Luis Robert, like it's going to be...
He's not giving him up for nothing.
No, it's going to be a crazy haul where people like me are going to say, wow, they really got a ton. Now, does that mean those guys are going to be good and it's going to be smart and worth it? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means you just traded one of the best players in franchise history because you're afraid you can't win with them, which is ridiculous.
Isn't that crazy?
But it's the point we're at. Garrett Crochet is a little bit different for me. So I've been on the side of like, start this guy. Like, you should have been starting this guy.
You yelled about it 2 years ago on our show.
You should have been starting this guy from the beginning. Like, your scouting director, when you took him, said this is a mid-rotation starter. And then the Tony thing happened, and they put him in the bullpen and whatever. So because of all that, Garrett Crochet looks awesome. But you only have 2 more years of control. And you and I have kind of talked like...
They should be able to sign him, though.
I'd offer Garrett Crochet 5 years, $70 million right now.
Right, because he's like, only had a couple of months of success.
You can stay here. You can be in our rotation.
Right, he's only had a couple of months of success, right? Yeah. So with a couple of months of success... And he doesn't have like Boris as his agent yet. No. I mean, like, so he should be a guy that you can go to and say, look, we're going to give you some security. You're a starter. We're very proud of you. We're sorry about the fact it took so long to get here. That wasn't me. Guests can be like, and we're going to give you this and we're going to make you secure and you'll still be young enough. And if you continue to get better, you're going to get a huge bag the next time you get out there. And here is a really good offer for a guy that really has only done it for a couple of months. Like, I'd be trying to extend him right now.
And I've heard some skepticism from some that are like, you know, like, oh, well, what if the White Sox don't think he can start long term or like this or that? And my thing is like, why would you, like, how have you watched this season and now you've come to the conclusion that this guy can't start, right? Now, I do think there's a point where he's going to hit a wall, like innings wise, where it's like, okay, like maybe he's
there's no way he's getting through the year. He barely pitched last year.
Like maybe he's done for the year because of innings, right? But he's definitely good enough to start. There's no reason why this guy should be like a bullpen pitcher.
Yeah, no.
And the fact that like AJ Preller is crazy and like is the guy that like wants him right now, like is telling for me, right? Like AJ Preller does this stuff all the time. The Padres don't have the system anymore for it, which is a little bit crazy because the Sox, like in these trades, they have to get position players.
When you see a Jonathan Cannon come up and have one fairly good start and then get crushed. And you see Nastrini struggling, but they seem like they want to stick with him as long as they can to see what he can do. Does that concern you? Because it's such a jump from AAA to the majors. On the other hand, it's a bandbox in Charlotte. So I would think that if they could find any success in Charlotte, they should have a good chance of doing well here. What do you make of that?
It doesn't concern me because those two guys specifically, I don't think are like definite mid-rotation, like, you know, number 2, number 3 starters. I think they're both back-end starters.
Okay.
Like, I think Nick Nastrini was a little bit overhyped. He has really good stuff, but he doesn't, like, know how to pitch necessarily, and he's always, like, walked too many guys. So, like, if Nick Nastrini is, you know, the 7th inning guy on your next, like, decent team, that wouldn't surprise me. Jonathan Cannon's as solid as it gets, like, workhorse from Georgia. Like, that's a number 5 starter. Like, it just is. Like, that's a back-end starter. You know, they have guys with much more upside than that, right? Like Drew Thorpe and Noah Schultz coming very quickly, despite like the lack of innings that he has, you know? Like, so...
How quick does he get here?
I think mid-season next year, probably, just because like if he's already at double, like what are we doing?
Sox fans, here's the deal. When you combine State Farm home and auto insurance, you save an average of $889. State Farm agent John Harrell is ready to help you combine home and auto and save in Chicagoland. Call him today. 708-481-4500. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Average annual per household savings based upon a 2019 national survey by State Farm of new policyholders who reported savings by switching to State Farm. That interview to be expanded and in full living color in 4K on the Sox in the Basement YouTube channel when our long-form 30-minute interviews down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar launch on Monday. Go subscribe. Don't miss it. Sox Nerd is going to finish out the show for us. Before we get to him, I want to take a look at the White Sox roster and the Cubs roster because both of those teams are terrible. And it hit me watching the Cubs play the White Sox and then looking at their roster, thinking to myself, what if I were to consolidate both of these teams into one? Do a little Major League Baseball contraction. Could I make a team with both of these teams? And what I found right away was there's still holes. Clearly, Corey Lee is the best catcher in Chicago. Clearly. Okay.
And not a question.
Miguel Amaya is hitting 190. We all know what Maldonado's hitting. I mean, Yan Gomes is hitting 148. Corey Lee's the best catcher in Chicago. So he's my catcher. Pedro would only play him half the time, so Pedro's not my manager. I'm not taking him.
No, I have a feeling Craig Counsell would give Corey Lee a lot of run there.
Craig Counsell would be my manager. We'll make that really clear. And Corey Lee would be his catcher. I know that. They would have a hard time figuring out which of the other catchers sucked the least. So it would be Corey Lee. So first base is interesting because I look at Michael Busch, who I remember being more of a second baseman, third baseman type guy, and they're using him at first base. And I didn't realize that until I looked at the roster.
Well, he was listed as an infielder, but he was always a little bit of Dr. Strangeglove at the hot corner and at second base. And that was one of the reasons why teams shied away from trading from him for the Dodgers, is that he kind of becomes a guy without a true position because...
Yeah. And that's the problem. So you have him and you have Gavin Sheets, and both of them basically have the same average, 236 and 238. Sheets has a 745 OPS, and Bush has a 769. Both of them are well above Andrew Vaughn. So I at this point, I'd be like, well, we need bench players, so take them both. I'm not taking Vaughn. I'm taking the both of those guys for now. Nico Horner has to be my second baseman. Like at this point, I'm taking him because he's at least, he gives more pop, and not even that much more pop than Nicky Lopez, but at least his OPS is hovering around 700. Like he's at league average. At least I get a league average offensive output, and he seems to be a pretty good fielder. I am really excited about Lenin Sosa, though, and the way he's playing. So I think I'm putting him on my bench in case he can break into this lineup. All right, but that's where I'm looking. At shortstop, I got to give DeYoung, because DeYoung has just been outplaying Dansby Swanson. And I know Dansby long-term may be the better player, but if I'm putting them together right now, DeYoung. So it's kind of funny. Like I'm mixing these guys pretty evenly, and there may be a little bit more from the White Sox, which is incredible when you think about it at this point, because the Sox are so bad record-wise, and the Cubs are better record-wise, right? Like maybe the manager makes a difference. Because I look at third base, and Christopher Morel sucks. Like all these Cub fans love him. I know they put him in all of their media stuff, like the hype of Morel. And the hype of Morel sounds a lot like the hype of Vaughn. Like I don't see anything of this guy. He's hitting 203.
It's all homers. He and Patrick Wisdom are the same guy on the north side. They are low average.
Right.
Swing for the fences and connect.
I would probably take him over Vaughn, though, because of the home runs. And right now, there isn't a third baseman that the White Sox can really trot out there. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to say Mendick? Ramos doesn't seem to be ready yet. I mean, I'd be giving him playing time, but he's not really ready yet. Moncada's injured, and I know I'm getting him off the team at the end of the year. So I'm probably keeping this kid. But this is one of those examples I mentioned earlier. It's really hard to find some of the positions, even with two rosters. Who would you have play third base? Like Lenin Sosa might actually fight his way into that role, even with Christopher Morel standing there. If I was combining the
if
teams.
You're willing to be fungible on positions, you could sit there and say, like, Cody Bellinger was a really good first baseman before Freddie Freeman was on the Dodgers.
Right, and then I could move Michael Bush over.
Well, or no, to the point is you could sit there and say that, with Bellinger at first, if you want Lenin Sosa as your second baseman, you could move over Nico Horner to short, and then you could move Lenin Sosa to third and keep the lineup as you had it with DeYoung at short. And there's opportunities there. I mean, I think what you come to with third base is that it's a wide open competition. I mean, frankly, in that scenario, if Yohan Moncada came back and was actually hitting decently, you might sit there and go, yeah, screw it, I'll put him in there.
Yeah, I might actually end up playing him when he came back, because it's really shallow. And then you look at what the Cubs have for his outfielders, and this is where they look flush, because they do have some really good outfielders, at least compared to the White Sox. I mean, Ian Happ, Bellinger, who you mentioned, is in the outfield mostly for them this year. Suzuki's out there, and Tauchman. I don't know how you pronounce it. Okay, right, he's not on my team, so I don't pay a lot of attention to it. But, I mean, they've got a lot of guys. I mean, we're talking 725 OPS, 770 OPS, 748 OPS, 786 OPS. You got a bunch of home runs in there. That's a far better producing outfield. Now, Luis Robert Jr. is kicking one of them off, because I'm not getting rid of him, because he's otherworldly. And once he gets going, he blows them all out of the water. And I love me some Corey Jokes. So the two of them have to make my roster to fit. And then there's going to be the Pham argument. Do I want some Tommy Pham? Do I want a guy who's going to sit there and say he's going to punch people? So the outfield is crowded. Like, my bench has a lot of outfield. But it's interesting. Not a lot from either team in the infield. And they have similar problems at similar positions, but they have very different records. One is bad and the other one is abysmal, which that's the first thing I think of when I start trying to combine these teams.
Well, and so, as you're looking at that, I mean, yeah, Bellinger and Suzuki and Happ and Tauchman are outproducing for the most part what the White Sox have. But then when you think about the talent level of Luis Robert Jr. and the fact that he just hasn't been in the lineup until now, or what Tommy Pham is doing, where he's more or less outproducing them a little bit too, the guys that we've mentioned. And then you've got a guy like Corey Jolks who's on a heater. You can sit there and kind of say that there is some level of, you could almost just take a White Sox outfield out of that, right? And you could go Pham, Jolks, and Robert just based on talent and hotness right now.
Like the Sox outfield actually looks really good right now without Benintendi out there. And if you start putting Sheets in a DH role or first base, it becomes really good. The one thing that would not be hard is finding the starting rotation. In fact, I think I could create between both baseball teams an incredible starting rotation. I could take Assad and Imanaga and Steele from the Cubs, and I could add Crochet and Fetty from the White Sox. And here are just the whips of those 5 pitchers. The walks and hits per innings pitched. Guys will not be getting on base against them. I got a 1.18, a 1.04, a 1.20, a 1.18, another 1.18, and a 0.933. That's starting pitching staff.
That's pretty good.
And that staff can get wins if you're getting some defense and a little bit of offensive production. So maybe I could make them a winner. They would be a pitching first team, and they probably get mowed down in the first round of the postseason. But if we could just contract the 2 baseball teams in this city to 1, and I don't know, let's just give ownership to the other group instead of Jerry Reinsdorf, it would be a better world.
Oh, I would take the Cubs ownership group over Jerry in a heartbeat.
I'm keeping the White
right
Sox
now.
uniform, though. All right? I'm sorry.
Oh,
it's cooler.
Yeah.
That music can mean only one thing. The Sox nerd Dave Marin is on the line with more tidbits and trivia and insider stuff for you. And he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and see everything they have going on this weekend and beyond at lamontdowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me?
Chris, when I would get in trouble as a lad, my go-to move was to change the subject. Well, that's where I am with the 2024 White Sox right now. Instead of presenting nuggets on the team, I thought I'd change the subject this week. How about them cicadas? Just kidding. Seriously, going off Sox topic a bit, a few weeks ago, I experienced a first and got a glimpse of the future all on the same day during my debut at the St. Paul Saints CHS Field in Minnesota. This was the first time I watched a game with the ball strike challenge rule. It was seamless and surprisingly non-controversial, so much so that the game ended with a successful pitcher's challenge for strike 3, and it all seemed so normal. This was the last of 10 or so ball strike challenges during the Saints' AAA Pacific Coast League clash with the Louisville Bats. Interestingly, all but one of the challenges were initiated by the batter with a tap to the top of a helmet. The plate umpire then announced the challenge, and a replay of the pitch via Gamecast was displayed on the center field scoreboard. Ball or strike was flashed at the end of the cast, and that was the decision. The whole process confirmed how accurate umpires can be. There were 336 pitches in this game and 10 challenges, which means 97% of the ball strike calls were accurate in the eyes of the pitcher or the batter. Each challenge took all of 25 seconds tops and really had no virtual impact on the length of the game. This matinee featured 15 runs, a 7-run first, 20 hits, 5 errors, 7 pitching changes, 3 steals, a hit by pitch, a wild pitch, and a pitch timer violation, and it was still completed in well under 3 hours. Interestingly, this day's Sox game, if you remember the rain delay marathon in St. Louis, would have been prolonged by the challenge system. C.B. Bucknor's game-ending called third strike of a Tanner Banks offering was clearly outside of the strike zone. This would have prompted a challenge, and the call would have been overturned by the system, and the game would have continued, putting the Sox 6th win of the campaign in jeopardy. Because of its efficiency and accuracy, this system in the major leagues is inevitable. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it next season at a big league ballpark near you. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder. You can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there's plenty of Sox Nerd material on Twitter and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger? Paul DeYoung hit his 10th homer of the season on June 5th at Wrigley Field. The Antioch native joins Jose Valentin, Juan Uribe, Alexei Ramirez, Ron Hansen, Chico Carrasquel, and Tim Anderson as White Sox shortstop with a 10-homer season. One more. On Thursday night, we saw Danny Mendick get a ground ball double play in his inning of work. He is not the first White Sox position player to do this. Dwayne Wise in 2012 and Wayne Nordhagen in 1979 also got double play balls during their mop-up stints on the mound. That's it, Chris. More than you wanted to know about robots, umpires, St. Paul, Minnesota, Paul DeYoung, and position players getting GIDP.
That's the Sox Nerd. This is Sox in the Basement. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube feed. Get all your options at soxinthebasement.com.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.